Okay, my name's Brittany LeBaron.
Holly Mortensen.
Leah Mon.
All right. Who wants to take charge?
I have it up. I can if you want, or...
Sure.
Take it.
So, this week we read A Sacred Duty, which I thought was a really good book. I finished it a lot quicker than I thought I was going to. And so the first discussion question was, having completed the book, how has your understanding and perception increased on the process of international policy and law?
I feel like I beforehand had no knowledge about it, and so like as I'm reading the book, it was kind of like what, but as I started to read and get the concept, I thought it was crazy how like the UN would create conferences and they're not even like set into law, but then they start getting implemented into like the United States and everything's because of the funding or different things like that. So it just surprised me how important the UN is, and I didn't understand anything about it and what was going on.
Yeah, I was the same way as you, Brittany. I didn't really know much about policy. What was I gonna say? I had some notes. Well, I don't know if this is right, but I thought I had read one part in the book where some of the delegates that were there kind of didn't seem to really take it that seriously, and so they just like, yeah, we'll sign that just because we want to be done and get this over as quick as we could. So I kind of thought I didn't know that either. So
Yeah, I was shocked to find that out too, and I think that's why it just reminded me how important it is to not just advocate for an issue, but say the decisions you're making do affect people. Either way, whether you vote one way or the other way, it's going to actually do something. I was really shocked about how little anybody knows about what's going on in those conferences. I mean, honestly, before I took this class, I didn't even know there were these types of conferences. And it's frustrating to me. I feel like since we're like America and a democracy, that we should know these things. Like people should tell us, and nobody's telling us unless they get, unless they're like the family advocates or the NGOs who are getting in, and then even then, in the case with like the Muslim speaker in the book and stuff, they get pushed out. And so it's how are we supposed to know what's going on? It's frustrating.
I just was just like blown away by the concept, and it's hard to believe, but he was there, of the whole how unfair it was. How like it was really one-sided, and they had their agenda and they pushed it and they were bullies, and like it still blows my mind because I guess that's part of politics, and especially with the UN, but I just couldn't believe how they got away with what they were doing. It just blew my mind.
I agree. I couldn't believe that people could live with themselves after doing that. Like, okay, I can understand with like the women's caucus, I can understand like living with yourself and like being okay with your cause, but knowing that you're intentionally throwing people out and bullying them and breaking the rules and standing there and criticizing them so they can't write their talks and stuff, knowing you're doing that, how can you feel good about what you're doing? Like, I don't know. One of the things that I'm not trying to like call any person on the other side like calling them bad or something, but there was a part in the book that really hit me really hard on a spiritual level. He talked about how when he was in the room trying to write his talk and those people were sitting and watching him, he talked about a darkness that was there, that he was used to being persecuted and he was used to being under pressure, and this was nothing, like this was so much more than that. And so he called it a big black, like, darkness. And the first thing I thought about when I read that was it's Satan. Like, he is in the presence of Satan. And I think, I think it was a very true impression. I think that was the Spirit kind of speaking to me a little bit, that Satan is really attacking the family, and he's attacking it personally and up front and without any, like, shame.
You know, what seems so crazy and that's like hard for me to fathom is I think, oh, these are bad people doing this, they're terrible, but they think they're doing what's right, and that's what just blows my mind. Is it's like, for how long has the traditional family worked? Forever. You know, it's like, why do we think we need to change it? You know, and the whole concept of how, you know, and you think about how Satan does it, where he opens the door just a crack, and then a little more, and it's like fully open. You know, and that's how, when he talks a lot about how the wording, remember the wording and how things are written, it's like, oh, it's for children's rights, but it's not to protect children, it's now so that parents can't choose for the kids, you know, and it's just crazy how Satan does one step at a time. So you see, okay, their beginning motivation was to help kids. There are kids who are suffering, okay, I see your little section there, but then they take to the point where it's so individualistic that they're making it so kids can basically take their parents to court or whatever they want, you know, and it's like, I don't know, I would trust teenagers to take charge. Sometimes I was a teenager, I know.
Yeah, you bring up a good point about the wording. Like, when they gave an example in the book, I was like, oh, I wouldn't have thought that meant that. But with all those different eyes and stuff, they were able to see all the different meanings and stuff. It was, crazy how one word can change the whole entire thing, you know?
It's incredible.
Yeah.
You know, I had that part in the book where he was rewriting that sentence, and it told, I don't have a book with me, but redefining the traditional family as a mother and a father and their children. And I guess you're going to have to kind of bear with me. I kind of had a weird response to that. I loved what he was doing, and I agreed it needed to be done. But I also thought about, like, with the UN, it's maybe not as important, but if that was going to be implemented exactly in, like, actual U.S. law, then what happens to families who don't have a mother and a father, you know? Not because they're choosing that, but because of their circumstances. Their dad's a drug addict, or, you know, whatever, you know, there are, I guess my point, sorry I'm rambling, my point is we're in the latter days and families are being attacked, and there are many, many families who have fallen prey to that. And so we also need to be careful not to exclude them, and to be able to bring them in and protect them as well as protect the traditional family. Does that make sense, what I'm trying to say? And so I was actually pretty perplexed by this, and I did email Sister Lake about it, and she gave me an awesome response about studying the proclamation, and that it'll answer a lot of my questions. And, you know, I did study it. It's just I'm still concerned about the actual laws that we make. I think it's important to make laws where families defended, but also provide resources and laws for families who are trying to be families but are broken, and provide them ways to not be broken. And I'm not talking about gay marriage, because that's not what a family is. But, you know, and so it's hard, because where do you draw that line? If I say, well, a family is a mom and her kids, then you have the gay people saying, well, why can't we be a family? You know? So it goes both ways. I see both sides. It's hard. It's hard to find that balance.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point that you made.
All right. Are we ready to move on to the next question? Okay. What role did you see the Lord playing in Professor Wilkins' efforts to advocate for the families of the world? What lessons did you learn for your own efforts?
I think that one thing I thought about is the Lord did lighten his mind when he needed it. You know, he only had like an hour to speak, and he was able to pull it together, you know, like when he was trying to write. Also, there are resources out there You know, he didn't have to create, oh, what do I think the family is, and have to make something. He can go off of what we've already been given. You know, so the lessons that we learned is that we have resources and we know the truth, and so we can be confident fighting for the family because we have, through, you know, prophets, been taught what the family is. And so it's not something that we have to decide. It's, we know how it's supposed to be, and we just, like him, can use that to our benefit.
Mm-hmm. One way that I saw the Lord in his life to help him advocate for the families was, well, at first he was really against going, and then little by little he was softened, and then he was like, yeah, I'm going to go. And then that one guy was like, where have you been? And that just stuck with him, you know, that people do need help, and that we can be answers to people, you know, if we choose to go for it and try to make a difference.
One thing, I'm butting back in, but one thing I thought was really stuck out to me is that he had training in theater. So therefore he was like really good at speaking. He had training in law, and so therefore he knew the books. And so I feel like the Lord knew the end from the beginning, and he knew that he had to do this. So throughout his life, he gave him the essential things he needed: the personality, the characteristics, the skill, experience, even the plays, you know, and things like that. And so I think we need to look in our lives and recognize, okay, what has the Lord given me for strengths that I can use to further the work?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You know, the thing that kept coming to my mind was I don't know what scripture it is, and I can't even, like, quote it, but you know how there's scripture that says using your talents, and he's given us these talents for a reason? That's what I kept thinking about when I thought about his story. That, you know, we're called to do certain things, and the Lord has given us gifts and talents to do those things. And if we're not using them, then we're not fulfilling our roles here. And so, I don't know, I guess it just really helped me strengthen my testimony that if you follow those promptings and follow those callings and do what you're good at, for the benefit of mankind and for the benefit to bring them to the Lord, then there's nothing that can stop you. You know, the Lord is going to be with you even if you're scared. And I also think he was humbled. I think the Lord humbled him pretty well, because at the beginning of the book he talked about how he wasn't really that, I don't know, excited or into the family proclamation. And then at the end of the book, that's what saved him.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so it's humbling to think about that. You know, we need to be paying attention to what we're learning in the gospel, because it's not just a good idea to use. We need it.
Yeah.
All right, next question. Even though the book was largely about Richard Wilkins' experience, what important supporting roles did you see others playing in this account? Why is it important to recognize this?
His wife definitely played a big part. Every time he talked to her, she knew exactly what to say to help him feel confident and to feel like he was doing the right thing. So yeah, I think that's really important, that we can draw strength from our spouse in times of need, and that's what they're, you know, there for. And I don't know, I thought she was one of the bigger strengths for him.
Mm-hmm.
I loved the relationship that he had with her. Like, I thought it was adorable, and I thought that the fact that she was just his rock, like, she could be just as nervous or just as, you know, such as I think when life gets a little crazy on our end, I'm riding the nerves instead of the rock. And so I really like that, and what, like, strength he drew on her. Like, I think if he would have called and she's like freaking out with him, that wouldn't have done nothing, you know.
Yeah.
Also, another person was the lady that talked him into going. You know, she's kind of pushy, but if she had never done that, and then none of this would happen. Plus, also, she did a lot of the background work for it, you know.
Mhm.
You know, it made me, honestly, I don't know if this is like super self-centered on me, but it made me think about, you know, if I am being the kind of person who can be that kind of a support for my husband. And my husband, he's a welding engineer. He's not really into this like social change field, although, you know, he's totally for it. But that's, you know, that's not what he's doing with his life. I don't know. It kind of humbled me to read about that, because I think just maybe where I am today, and I don't know, I would really miss him if he was gone for that long and that often. And especially with the kids, I'd be like, you need to be home with us. You need to, like, you're missing your kids' lives. We're moving. You know, it's our 25th anniversary. We were supposed to do this play together. Like, at what point do you start paying attention to us and our family instead of the world's families, you know?
Yeah.
And I realized how, like, selfish that was. When
I would be the same way though, Leah. Like,
yeah.
yeah,
I
it's hard.
that is hard. I could not get that thought in my head. Is I don't know if I would have responded that way, as his wife did. If he called me upset, I would have been like, you should come home. Yeah. You know. So I don't know. It was humbling. I hope I can at least. I don't know if I'm at that place yet. I hope I can have a change of heart so I can be at that place. Yeah. All right. Ponder your readings from A Sacred Duty. What are some consequences and risk of minimizing or eliminating family and religion from public policy?
Well, the proclamation says that the family is a fundamental unit of society. So if we take out family, then we have been warned and forewarned in the proclamation that there will be calamities, you know, and so that right there, that's why we can't take it out, because we have been warned from a prophet of God that it will be no good.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And I think science shows that. And I actually wrote a paper about this recently. It's so interesting to me that people say, well, science and religion don't go together. Because if you really get into the research, and I'm not talking about the biased research that gets published because of, you know, being politically correct or whatever, like the real stuff, if you look at it, it really supports what the church teaches. And so there's truth everywhere. And we've seen that. We've seen that with what happens when dads leave the family, or, you know, we've seen that already with the increase in the prison population and crime rates and drugs, and we're living it right now.
Yeah, I can't remember if he had quoted this or where it came from in the book, but basically, yeah, the same thing. The family is the basic unit of society. It is central to our communities. And that it just went on to say that if we're going to solve our problems, it needs to be solved in our families. And I totally agree with that. I don't think there's any other way.
There's not. And I think there's a reason we've come to this point where culturally there's a belief that our problems of poverty, crime rates, gangs, whatever, are because the families are broken, and which they are, but therefore the government has to step in and do something about it. And that, you know, I can see why that would be the knee-jerk reaction, is our families are failing, so we need to be family, right? But they went the wrong way. The right way is saying, how do we heal family so we don't have to do that?
Yeah.
I just couldn't believe how, that's just side talk, but how much the UN is anti, like, motherhood. This is, like, blows my mind, you know, how it's, like, talking about how it's so, like, depriving and so, you know, and really is very, very selfless and very thankless job at times, but it really is the best thing that we could be doing for our families or for our lives for eternity. So it's just kind of crazy for people to think so against that, you know,
Yeah.
that it just, I don't know. It's like
Yeah.
we all had our own moms that sacrificed. Why aren't we going to do it? You know?
Mhm.
Right.
Well,
Well, and then they talked about how kids were pretty much a burden and a
yeah.
problem and stuff.
I
And
know.
I'm like, okay, not that I'm for this, because I think, you should have children just like the plan of salvation, what the church teaches. But if you feel that way, why are you having kids?
Yeah.
Like,
Exactly.
stop having children. They need to go somewhere else, you know? Sorry, I get really upset about that when I feel like parents who don't want to be parents have kids. Like, you could give them up for adoption, you could just not have kids, I mean,
Mhm.
if they're that horrible for you, don't do it.
Yeah.
Anyway, super frustrating. I think it's Satan. I really do. I don't understand how people could live with themselves saying those things.
And the thing is that it is so hard. Like the other day, I was laughing because we were all in the car for way too long, and we were all hungry, and the boys were just awful. Like they were just whining, and everyone's crying. And then I kind of laughed, and I'm like, okay, this is why motherhood is not glorified, you know. But then again, I know it's right, you know, and it's you
Mhm.
deal with it, but it really isn't easy. And so therefore, I think that's why we're in a society that's like, if it's not good for me, I'm out. You know, if I'm
Yeah.
not having a
It's too
blast,
hard.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
the other day it wasn't a blast, but I still knew it was the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Well, but you still had this fundamental love for your kids too, even in that moment. I'm sure you were irritated and you had some probably interesting thoughts, but you still like loved your kids. And I don't know, it was a book, so I can't speak as if I've talked to these people, but the way the book portrayed them was that they just don't care about anybody else but themselves ever.
It's crazy. Because, like, we all
Yeah.
have an inner drive, I think, naturally, to have kids. That's, you know, that's what we are here to do, you know, and so you're doing a lot of stomping out to get that away, I feel like.
It's Satan. I don't feel like a normal person who, is an agent of themselves could say those things unless they were really under the power of Satan. I know that's like a big, like, weird thing to say, but I really do think that they weren't the ones talking anymore. So, I don't know. Yeah. All right. Based on a sacred duty, what do you think we can do about it? Does the author implicitly or explicitly make realistic suggestions for ordinary citizens as well as those in position of power and influence? Provide examples.
Did he give examples?
I don't think
I
explicitly
don't
he did.
remember.
I think the message of the book was very implicit, and what I got from it was, if we do what we're supposed to do and we aren't afraid and we follow the Spirit, then we can really make a difference. I think the lesson for me, at least from the book, was to put yourself out there, and that things do happen. And at the end of the book, I don't know if you guys read the epilogue or anything, but in the epilogue it talked about how he went to another conference and they pretty much just said, well, ignore what happened in Istanbul because people were like crazy.
Mhm.
So that was really, I don't know, that hit me hard spiritually, I guess, that our work is never done and we need to continue to put ourselves out there. And as I wish there was more concrete suggestions of like how to do that, but I think if we look for them and we're open, our hearts and our minds are open to them, then those opportunities will come to us.
Mhm. I really like that. Yeah, I think the hardest part is just putting ourselves out there and just taking that step. You know, what he did was hard. I couldn't have done that, that's for sure.
I think also, like, learning about this and learning about what some of the families going through in policy, it kind of has solidified me more into what I believe. You know, sometimes we can get kind of laid back, and what I've always seen is family and families but I think seeing that there is really a battle has kind of opened my eyes to watch for it and did not like get caught up. You know, because sometimes it really does look appealing, you know, and that's what happens is you have a little bit of truth and some wrong, and being aware of that and seeing what's going on, then we don't get caught up in the fact that that is what's happening. Don't start accepting those little half truths until we're on the other side. I got discouraged reading the book because I was like, oh, that's so awesome. He did so much work, and then at the end he's like, and it got erased, and I was like, what?
Yeah.
Like, that's so discouraging. And there's no funding for the family people, but there's so much funding for the women's caucus. But I guess I just thought of this now, is we know who's going to ultimately win in life, So I guess I just thought of that. We don't need to be discouraged. We need to just kind of be like, well, we know what side we're on, and we're gonna fight to the end because we know we will win. So even though the world doesn't look like we're winning, I guess that's something to think about.
Yeah. Having that eternal perspective. I also think that an implicit message was to look for things in the nuances. Like, I don't know, the examples that he gave about the words and the language changing, I was like, wow, I didn't even think about how that could hurt families, And so I definitely learned the lesson that when I am looking for ways to defend them, they're not going to be like, hey, you need to defend this, big sign, come here, help us, It's going to be really small and very quiet.
Yeah.
And that's how Satan, he leads us down very carefully. So we need to also be very careful in our advocacy.
That's a good point.
So, all right, any other thoughts?
I think I'm good.
All right, does somebody want to summarize? Or should I?
I can do it. I'll do it. So we just discussed the book by Professor Wilkins about his trip to Istanbul and how he defended the family and how the Lord was there to lead and guide his actions as he did so. And we talked about how the Lord can lead and guide our lives as we look for it, and that as we seek to defend the family, we need to follow the prophets and the doctrine that we know is true. And as we do that, we'll know that we are doing those things that are pleasing to our Heavenly Father. There we go.